Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name's Tim and I converted to Islam 18 months ago. Growing up, I went to a school that was actually part of the Church of England. Through high school, we had at least 2 hours of religious education built into the curriculum each week. I always believed that there was a person called Jesus and that he was a great prophet and a messenger that came down from God. The part that I had trouble with is that Jesus was a man. He was born of a woman, albeit from miraculous ways. He was still a man. He was not a god. And why should we as men be worshipping another man? Surely we should be worshipping God. And the concept of there is just one God and that you should only worship that God alone and not worship idols or other people, and that forgiveness can only come directly from your relationship to God, really was what started clinching it for me.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Paige and I converted to Islam 2 years ago. I was raised by my father, who was an atheist, and he raised my sister and I as atheists, and I didn't believe in any God at all growing up. I thought that people who were religious were silly. I thought that religion was something the governments used to keep their populations in line, because if you have something better to look forward to after death, you'll be more obedient during life. Sometime around high school, I started going with a friend to her church occasionally as a guest, and I really was moved by the faith that people seem to have, but I still couldn't get my head around the inconsistencies. Especially with Christianity, there are a lot of leaps of faith that I just wasn't willing to make. I've always been interested in philosophy and people in general and religion and religious history, and I happened to be watching a documentary about the three Abrahamic faiths, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And it was the first time I'd really listened to anything on Islam, and I found it fascinating that Islam comes from Christianity, which of course comes from Judaism, and that the message is essentially the same message. And I thought it was like God kept trying to give us this message, and human beings kept messing it up.
It was a couple of years later, before Paige started her interest in Islam, and then me following that interest to really to see what it is, what's she getting into here.
After 9/11, I was working in a bookstore here in the United States called Barnes & Noble, and everything we had in the store that had Islam, Quran, Muslim, Middle East in the title just sold out the next day on 9/12. I just thought that was fascinating, and I didn't know anything about it, so I started kind of reading. I bought a book called Islam for Dummies, really good. There were just some really, really beautiful things about Islam, and I found myself more and more drawn to it, especially its rationality. Like I said, Christianity has leaps of faith. Islam really doesn't. It's all a very rational religion. Everything makes sense.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Kayla Botello, and I was born in the United States of America. I was raised here my whole life, and I converted to Islam over a year ago. I believed in God. I've always had a kind of a positive attitude on life, and so for me it was kind of like looking around, and there's so much beauty in the world, how can there not be a God? But as far as any kind of religion, I didn't have a religion. Converting to Islam was a series of events, it wasn't one defining moment. I think what really got me about Islam, because I started coming to classes after my mother had converted. So I started coming to classes, just for my mom, to be respectful and to understand her. And a lot of things that caught me was the science in Islam. They talked about the Big Bang, and they talked about just things like where the salt water meets the fresh water that was only discovered in the 70s. Just things like that just seemed like, how could they know that 1,400 years ago? And for me, I believed in God, but I also believed in me, and that was really really what got me in Islam, is that I can be intelligent and knowledgeable and logical and also believe that there's a God.
And you wonder how far you can go. Every step on that road that you take, Allah